Okay, on the stand, Officer Christopher Sanders, and it looked like they were just going through some of the items. I think it was Officer Sean Bolton's uniform that they had there into evidence. I want to bring in my guest now, Jennifer Schuster, a criminal defense attorney out of Chicago. What do you make so far of this case?
Well, so far, it's interesting because this is a death penalty case, and when the death penalty is on the table, it's an entirely different ballgame. So to that end, I think the defense is trying to bring in some of those mitigating factors earlier than perhaps they would have if we weren't dealing with the death penalty.
And right now we do have that crime scene officer on the stand. If we can show quickly a live shot, I think they've been going through. There he is there. You can see they have an evidence box, and I believe that they're trying to enter into evidence Sean Bolton's police uniform on the day that he was killed. Important testimony. Jennifer?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, this goes to the brutal nature of this crime. I mean, we've already heard testimony from other witnesses about how horrific this shooting was, the number of shots, the sequence of shots. As you mentioned, Rachel, he was shot 8 times, lots of blood, lots of gore. Certainly is going to have a big impact on the jury.
Jennifer, stand by for me if you would. Let's take it back to Tennessee live in the courtroom right now. Okay, some pretty quick testimony from Christopher Sanders from the crime scene unit talking about Officer Sean Bolton's gun that he had and what else he had that evening. I'm joined now by Jennifer Schuster. Why is this important testimony or necessary?
Well, Rachel, the crux of the defense is that the defendant panicked, and that's why he subsequently shot this officer. Well, the officer never took his gun out of his holster. The gun was fully loaded, and they just presented evidence of all of that ammunition. So it's critical in showing that perhaps this defendant really didn't feel like his life was in danger.
And that is his whole defense. He didn't intend to kill him. That he was doing this basically out of self-defense. He felt threatened. But, will this hold up? Will the jurors buy it? I think it's a tough mountain to climb on that. Don't you agree, Jennifer?
I agree. It's a tough proposition here. I mean, they're trying to sneak in that evidence of the fact that there was a shooting less than a month before this incident occurred, in which a black young man was killed by a white officer. And so they're trying to show that his state of mind was that he was panicked and he was fearful of that. But I think this evidence that was just admitted directly contradicts that.
They're trying to say he feared so much that this officer would be trigger happy because that was his mindset, that he just figured that something bad would happen. Okay, let's take it back to court. I think there's another witness on the stand. Welcome back, everybody. Let's take you right to Tennessee, where right now we are covering the case against Tremaine Wilbourn. He is the man that is accused of killing a cop, facing first-degree murder charges, carjacking charges, employment of a firearm with the intent to commit felony murder, convicted felon in possession of a handgun. The victim in all of this, as we've mentioned, is Officer Sean Bolton. He was only 33 years old, and according to an autopsy report, Bolton was shot 8 times. A little more information about this. The state will be seeking the death penalty. Bolton was on duty. Wilbourn was previously convicted for an act of violence, which is why they're seeking the death penalty. And they're also seeking it because the killing was committed to avoid arrest, according to prosecutors. That court is live right now, so let's kick it over there. Okay, a bit of a pause in court as William Merritt from the district attorney's office is on the stand. It looks like they're going to enter in some video evidence, and they're showing a car that I guess belonged to Tremaine Wilbourn's girlfriend. I'm here alongside Jennifer Schuster, who joins us via Skype. Jennifer, I'm not sure how all of this is relevant. Are you following it? Sometimes these things are hard to piece together at first.
My understanding of the evidence is that after the shooting took place, after Wilbourn shot the officer, he fled the scene and he subsequently hijacked someone. And I thought that was the 2002 Honda that they're talking about right now. I'm not sure. And so to that end, it would go to this man's violent criminal nature, which is certainly relevant in assessing whether or not he's a continued threat to society.
Okay, I think do we have some audio in court? No, okay, not yet. That is right there that you're looking at is Tremaine Wilbourn, the defendant on all of this. Looks like he's chewing gum or something like that. But he has been, from the glimpses we've been getting of him, very, very much paying attention to what's going on. And it sounds like he's actually going to testify himself.
Right, right. That's what we've been hearing. And that's always, a difficult proposition, because when the defendant takes the stand, he surely will be subject to a brutal cross-examination. It's certainly something he's discussed at length with his lawyers, but it sounds like he's made that decision. Strategically, it may be because this is a death penalty case. He wants to get on the stand early and start having these jurors see him as a person and perhaps feel at least some reason that he has some redeeming value and his life should be saved.
Right, because this is going to be the case where a lot of times these cases go to trial because it's about avoiding the death penalty. And that, of course, is what he's facing for this August 1st, 2015 killing of Sean Bolton. And again, that officer, again, there is no question here. He's not denying actually pulling the trigger. I believe he pulled it 11 times. There's the picture of Officer Sean Bolton. What he is trying to say, what the defense is trying to say, is he didn't intend to kill this officer, and that he was basically, there was some kind of scuffle and he was fearful he was going to be killed himself. Okay, Jennifer, you're going to stand by with me. We always love your insights. I believe there's some more action happening in court right now in the Memphis, Tennessee area. Looks like they're playing a video. Let's listen in. All right, folks, we're just listening to some testimony from the guy who worked at the DA's office, William Merritt. I want to bring in my guest, Jennifer Schuster. She's a criminal defense attorney from Chicago. Why is his testimony necessary? And talk a little bit about what he was going over.
Well, he was talking about this carjacking that happened moments after the defendant shot this officer. And that's relevant in the whole string of events here. I mean, we're talking about a man who was just released from prison, goes and kills a cop, and then minutes after that engages in another crime, a carjacking and brandishing a weapon. So this really paints a picture of a man who has an extensive criminal history, is currently still violent, and that certainly is relevant in a death penalty case where the jury must squarely answer the question, does this man continue to pose a threat to society?
Yeah, and the question now is, and we touched a little bit on this before we went to break earlier, is what can he possibly say to those jurors when he takes the stand, because he has said that he's going to take the stand in his own defense, that would convince them that this was not a cold-blooded murder, that this was in some way, I guess he's trying to say, self-defense. I think that's going to be difficult.
Right. So we know the defense's theory is that he's going to say that he panicked and that he didn't intend to kill this officer. So whether or not he'll be successful in proving that remains to be seen, and it doesn't look good. But the second point they possibly could convey is that he just gets on the stand and starts showing himself as a person to the jury. And that's critical in a death penalty case, because the jury also has to determine whether or not this man has any redeeming qualities that make his life worth saving. So by putting him on the stand, it's an opportunity for him to show the jurors that he's also a person too, and that he wants to at least gain a modicum of sympathy so his life can be spared.
All right, it looks like in the courtroom, it's a morning break in this Memphis, Tennessee case that we're following. When they resume, we'll take you back to court. We've had a very eventful day here on the Law and Crime Network. We're also following this other case where we had the defendant take the stand in that case. Again, these are so unusual when this sort of thing happens. Here we have two cases where the defendant took the stand. Let's go back and rewind a little bit and listen to some testimony in the Tremaine Wilbourn case from Lawana Stamps, who was the police radio dispatcher. And remember, the person who called 911 actually had to use the police radio to report that this officer was dead. Let's listen. Okay, so you're just listening to some of the audio from that police dispatch when that call came in that the officer, Sean Bolton, was down. I'm joined again by Jennifer. Obviously, this is a very important part of the story here.
Right, absolutely. It's taking the jury back to moments right after the shooting happened. And we're hearing from the authorities who are calling in saying that there's an officer who's down, he's bleeding, and we know that they show up to this crime scene and this officer has a tremendous amount of injuries, shot 8 times, even though he was wearing a bulletproof vest. The majority of the wounds, my understanding is that they were to his face, and it was really
very brutal, yes. Okay, so let's listen now to Chris Lanier. He was actually the person who called through the radio to report what had happened to this officer. Take a listen. Okay, so this is very interesting. Here they are in the driveway. The shooting just happened. Sean Bolton's lying there bleeding. And this witness that you just heard from is trying to call 911, but oddly, it wouldn't go through on his phone, so he had the wherewithal to pick up the cop's walkie-talkie from his shoulder and actually call the police dispatch through that way. Some pretty incredible testimony if you think about it, Jennifer.
Yeah, some quick thinking on behalf of this witness. It's not typical, certainly, for the police to receive calls from a civilian on a police officer's radio. But luckily, this man, in that moment, notwithstanding all of the chaos and all of the trauma surrounding him, he made the right decision to use that radio and was able to contact police.
It is a bit odd, though, that when he tried to call 911 himself, it wouldn't go through, but no understanding of why that might be, but certainly kind of puzzling.
I think, actually, my understanding is that there were numerous neighbors who were also trying to call 911. And I don't know if that still is sort of curious that none of them could get through, or I don't know if perhaps because the cops were being overwhelmed with so many calls that this witness's call couldn't go through.
All right, well, we're going to continue delving into this case. It's on a quick break. As soon as it's back live, we'll take you live back to the courtroom. In the meantime, let's take a quick break. All right, let's bring in Jennifer Schuster, who's been my guest. She's been watching this case along with me. What do you make of Marquise Wright's testimony? He's really a key witness in all of this.
Sure. I mean, it sounds like he's credible. I don't know what sort of issues that will be brought up on cross-examination in terms of his credibility. But, you know, he says that he saw his friend. I mean, I'm presuming that he was friends with the defendant. You know, he testifies to the fact that he pushed the officer away. He can also speak to the fact that the officer didn't draw his weapon, and he subsequently ran in to his uncle's house to get help. So far, he seems like a pretty credible witness to me.
Yeah, that's pretty damning testimony for the defendant. You have this guy who's actually a friend saying, yeah, it didn't seem like there was any kind of threat coming from this officer at all. In fact, he didn't even draw his weapon. Let's continue to listen to more testimony from that police radio dispatcher that we talked about. She's the one that got the call from the uncle. He ran into the house to get his uncle because all of these neighbors couldn't get through to 911. Let's listen to more of her testimony. And it seems like Officer Boyd is getting a little emotional as he recounts the day when his fellow officer, Sean, this will kind of weigh on the jurors. Jennifer?
Sure, absolutely. It's compelling testimony, just his demeanor, like you said. The fact that he's not exactly losing composure, but clearly emotional. I mean, we've got a police officer here who looks especially tough, and he's wiping away the tears because this image is just seared into his memory, and we can all only imagine just how terrible it was.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Okay, if you're just joining us here on the Law&Crime Network, we are covering 2 live trials today. We had been this morning. The Tremaine Wilbourn case out of Memphis, Tennessee. It's on a quick morning break, but we'll take you back live there in just a few minutes as soon as testimony resumes. In the meantime, we're going to take a quick break here on the Law&Crime Network. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, we're listening to some testimony from the defendant himself in the Zachary Keene trial. That's Zachary Keene, and he's talking about some of the drug usage that both he did, he talked about that earlier, and also his girlfriend. Jennifer has been on the line with me for the last couple of hours. Jennifer, what do you make so far of his testimony? We haven't gotten really into the meat of it yet.
Well, the gist of his defense is that he was unavailable. He was working, and then also, largely his argument is, it was my girlfriend's fault, the mother of this child. It was her fault. And we'll hear him say repeatedly, I put my trust in the wrong person. Now, do I think that will be an effective strategy? Absolutely not. This case is despicable. As you said, so tremendously sad what happened to this baby.
Yeah, come on. Doesn't a father have to take, sorry, it does get me a little bit angry too. Doesn't the father have to take some kind of personal responsibility? The fact that, you know, you're in rehab, you're taking drugs, that's some kind of excuse?
Absolutely. Both parents are equally responsible, and I suspect the jury will hold them to that.
Okay, let's listen to a little bit more of his testimony and see what you make of it. Gosh, I gotta think this is a case where the defendant was insisting Jennifer to testify. What do you think?
Most likely. I mean, it's usually against the defense lawyer's advice for a defendant to ever take the stand. But the crux of his story is that he's blaming his girlfriend and the mother of the child, and no one can tell that story except this witness. So to that end, perhaps his lawyer said, you know, that's the only way to get this point across. Ultimately, the decision rests with the defendant, and obviously that's what he's chosen to do.
All right, folks. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in the next few minutes, and we want to take you live back to that case in Tennessee that we've been covering, that guy that's facing murder charges for killing a police officer. We're back live in court in that case. We're going to take a quick break and take you right back to Tennessee. Stay with us. Okay, welcome back, everybody, to the Law and Crime Trial Network. We were just in the case earlier today in Memphis, Tennessee, the man that's facing charges for murdering a Memphis, Tennessee police officer. That case has gone into lunch, so we're turning back to this other case that we've been tracking all morning long. It's the case against Zachary Keene. He's the father who's facing murder charges for allegedly his part in his role of the death of his 4-month-old son. I think we have some information on that case, so let's take a look at a graphic. Okay, so this is a case that we're following very closely in Iowa. As I mentioned, this is the Zachary Keene case. Zachary Keene is facing first-degree murder and child endangerment charges. Such a brutal case. The victim in all of this, there he is right there, that little boy, Sterling Keene. He was found dead in his swing. The baby's diaper hadn't been changed, or he hadn't been bathed in 9 to 13 days, according to the state. The medical examiner ruled the death as a homicide caused by failure to provide critical care. Friends and relatives of the family report the couple's extensive history of drug use most likely played a factor into this case, and you can see the co-defendant, his girlfriend, in those mugshots right there. It's a very difficult case to listen to, but definitely an important one. Zachary Keene, the defendant in this case, he took the stand in his own defense, saying really it was his girlfriend's fault. One of the reasons he said is that he never changed the diapers. Let's listen as he addresses the jurors in his own defense, trying to get off from this murder charge. All right, so there you hear it. Zachary Keene describing the circumstances in his words of why he was not involved in any way, according to him, with the death of his 4-month-old son, Sterling. He didn't change diapers, according to him. He was busy. They had different schedules. He noticed he wasn't chunking up like his other daughter, but he didn't really think much of it. Jennifer, I got to tell you, just watching this guy makes you a little bit angry. I can only imagine what the jurors are thinking.
If this testimony wasn't so tragic, it would be laughable.
It's horrible. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Completely unbelievable. You know, I've got a couple of questions for him on cross already. you and your weak stomach can't stand changing diapers, but over the course of at least 2 weeks, you didn't smell the stench of those diapers coming from the room right next door to your own bedroom, let alone the smell of what we now know was a decomposing body. None of his rationale and reasons here, none of it is the slightest bit believable, and I don't suspect any of it is flying with the jurors.
And like, maybe, let's say it was true that he was really that hands-off-ish on his child, where he just, you know, he didn't care that this child was born, and he was just letting his girlfriend take care of the child, and he would come and go as he pleased, do his drug recovery or whatever he says he was doing. Still, even if you bring his story, I still think that that could be a first-degree murder charge. Sorry.
Yeah. We know he lived in the house. You know, whether or not you're coming and going because you work a lot, lots of parents work a lot, but he's in the same household as that child. He's caring for another child. And he testifies that that child was well fed, well taken care of. So what's going on with the other child? It just doesn't add up.
It certainly doesn't. Okay, Jennifer, stand with me. Stand by just for a few minutes. We got to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a few minutes. You know, just listening to the first responders describe and the witnesses describe what they saw when they first encountered this child that had been sitting in a swing from anywhere from 9 to 13 days, according to the medical examiners. It's very raw, especially for those first responders. And these are folks that deal with all kinds of tragedies all of the time, Jennifer. I found that testimony very, very hard to listen to, and it builds emotion in you hearing it.
Right. Certainly when you're hearing from first responders and authorities who see this type of thing throughout the course of their career, certainly not every day, but when you see those folks starting to break down on the stand, that says something. Just listening to their words alone, just about how thin this child was, just some of the words that they say and the images that they generate is just so compelling and so saddening that it certainly is going to resonate with the jurors, and this defendant is in a very difficult spot here.
And we were just playing some video while you were talking. That's actually the defendant during his police interview. It's the body cam when the officer was speaking to him in his house, and he's holding his other child, a little girl. So we all know that the defendant took the stand in this case this morning and basically tries to distance himself from this, saying he was never there, he smelled something, but he thought it was just dirty diapers. So let's listen to more of what he had to say. All right, so there is the defendant in this case, Zachary Keene, under cross-examination. And I thought one of the first questions you just heard was very, very important. And he had testified to the fact that he didn't change diapers because he couldn't stand the smell of feces and that smell, and so he wouldn't do it. Yet, the prosecutor brings up, you worked at a sewage company. And he tries to make some kind of distinction between the two. Jennifer, been my guest this afternoon. What do you make of this cross-examination?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the fact that he tries to make this distinction between human and animal feces is just preposterous. And to believe his whole story is really to believe a series of implausible events, everything from him not smelling the diaper and the decomposing body, even though he lives in the same house as this child. Actually, his room was right next door to the baby's room. And down to the latest testimony where he says that he tried to call 911, but he didn't have a cell signal. Okay, whatever. Not believable whatsoever.
And then the prosecutor actually asked, well, then, you know, you have neighbors. You could have knocked on their door, seen if they had a landline, seen if they had a phone. And his answer to whether he did that was also no. All right, let's listen to he does finally call 911. Let's listen to Zachary Keene's 911 phone call. Okay, so that was the 911 call from Zachary Keene. And Jennifer and I both have quite concerned faces on as we listen to that. What did you make of the 911 call?
It's a little tough to hear, but overall I can tell that he certainly isn't panicked. He seems calm and collected, which is very telling. I mean, this man presumably should be in a state of panic. You know, I suspect that he'll likely argue that he was in such a state of shock that he shut down emotionally. But I think to most people, likely the state will argue that it just doesn't make sense that his demeanor would be so calm as it was on that 911 call.
All right, folks. Well, we're going to take a quick break here. I want to tell you this case is on break as well and is going to resume again on Tuesday. They don't have a necessary witness. The defense doesn't have a necessary witness available till Tuesday, but we'll continue to stream it live and continue to review this important testimony. But first, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. All right, I'm going to bring my guest back in, Jennifer, and also I want to read some of the responses to the testimony of Zachary Keene from our audience, from some of the folks that are watching this on social media, weighing in. One tweet response is, he can't stand the smell of a dirty diaper because it made him nauseous, but he could handle delivering a baby in the tub. Seriously? Because remember, this was a home delivery. Another viewer wrote, didn't see any gnats. Did he notice how wet the baby was? Did he notice the baby lost his cry? Please. He didn't go anywhere near the baby for weeks. And again, he just testified in cross-examination that his room was right next to little Sterling's room and that he would be walking back and forth all of the time.
Yeah, those are great points being raised by the viewers. Another moment in cross that really resonated with me was when the state made the point that you took better care of your dog than you did this child, and the defendant effectively admitted that. The cross here is extremely effective. The prosecutor is going in and making point by point, settling in on each question and really making a point and then moving on to the next point very methodically. It's very easy for the jurors to follow. Interestingly, they're starting to ask more open-ended questions, and I think that they're starting to see that this defendant is going to give them the answers that they're looking for, and consequently, they don't have to focus on those close-ended questions as much here.
Well, and we were just showing some video, too, during a lot of the testimony. Zachary Keene was actually covering his face. That was kind of what he was doing during some of the testimony. There's some questions as to whether that was some kind of ploy. His attorneys maybe encouraged him to do that. Regardless here, I think that the prosecutor did a very effective job in the cross-examination of Zachary Keene, really driving home the implausibility of some of his excuses. We have to take a quick break here on the Law and Crime Network, but we'll be back in just a few minutes. Stay with us. Thank you, as always, from Anthony for putting together those stories and monitoring what's going on across the country in the crime world. If you want to go and see more stories and learn more, head to our website, lawandcrime.com. For now, we're going to take it to Iowa, where we are covering this horrible case. It's a case against Zachary Keene. The trial's taking place about 80 miles or so from the Quad Cities, if you're familiar with the area. This is the defendant, Zachary Keene. He's facing first-degree murder and child endangerment charges. This is the poor victim here, 4-month-old Sterling Keene. On August 30th, 2017, he was found dead in his swing. His diaper hadn't been changed or he hadn't been bathed in anywhere from 9 to 13 days. The medical examiner ruled the death as a homicide caused by failure to provide critical care. Friends and relatives of the family have pointed to the couple's extensive history of drug use, and that is actually something that Zachary Keene himself mentioned when he was on the stand. So again, he talked about, when he was on the stand, and we played some of this earlier, his meth addiction. His girlfriend, the mother of that baby, was also addicted to meth. Very unusual, but he took the stand in his own defense this morning, and we've been listening to some of that testimony. Let's listen to some more. Okay, so Zachary Keene on the stand there in his own defense, trying to distance himself as much as possible from any care of this child, basically saying, yes, he did notice this vomit smell when the child, Sterling, that 4-month-old, was brought out in his car seat, but he was told that it didn't have anything to do with that child's diapers not being changed, but instead it was some milk that had soured on the car seat. And I guess this guy just went along with whatever his girlfriend told him and didn't seem to want to check it out or check at all in the safety and the welfare of his child. That's what he's testifying to in his own words. We've heard from some of our audience about how he fared, and it is not good. Let's continue to monitor this trial. We have to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a few minutes.